Welcome to part 6 of the video series. This one is on balance sheet. Balance sheet is one of the biggest, if not the biggest thing I look for in a company. Why is balance sheet so important? Balance sheet is so important because balance sheet allows the entire business to operate for the long term or for the short term. And I want businesses operating for the long term. I want businesses making decisions for the long term. If a company has a very strong balance sheet, and we'll look at the numbers and we'll talk about, what specific numbers I'm looking for, but a company that has a really strong balance sheet, guys, that company is going to be able to focus long term. They're not going to have to make decisions short term. See, what you have is companies that have weak balance sheets, okay? Well, companies that have weak balance sheets, they have to make short-term decisions. Why? Because maybe they don't have all that cash on the balance sheet. Maybe they have a lot of debt. Maybe they have this, maybe they have that. And guess what? They have to start making short-term decisions that affect the long-term prospects of that company. And guess what? Another reason balance sheets are so important is, guess what? Sometimes bad things are going to happen. Sometimes a recession is going to happen. Sometimes the company's just going to fail. They're going to mis-execute, and you never saw that coming. They just screwed up so bad somehow. A great balance sheet can get them through that situation, and you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, my business is going to go out of business. Because guess what? If you're in this game long enough, you're investing for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you're gonna get into stock that's just, you had some bad luck and some things went wrong with that company for whatever reason. And if you didn't get in a company that has a strong balance sheet, it's a good chance that company could go out of business, literally out of business. There's so many people, who invest in oil companies, because we saw oil prices, they'd been $100 or above for a long time. They invested in a lot of oil companies, and all of a sudden 2013, 2014, oil prices started to dip. And a lot of people that were not paying attention to balance sheets got absolutely destroyed in some of those oil and gas companies because so many of them literally became worthless within about a 12 to 18 month span, because oil went from $100 a barrel to all of a sudden $40 a barrel. Almost literally felt like overnight, but it was over a course of like a year or a year and a half. Tons of oil and gas companies that were highly leveraged, had tons of debt and little cash and those kinds of things, they literally went out of business, guys. And investors lost massive amounts of money. The ones that made it through are the ones that had strong balance sheets. They got through that, guys. So that's why balance sheet is so important. So what I'm looking for in a balance sheet, okay? So you got a lot of different line categories you're looking at in a balance sheet. For me as an investor, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the cash and cash equivalents number. I want to see what they have in cash on that balance sheet. Then I want to see what they have in short-term investments on that balance sheet. Then I want to see what they have in long-term investments on that balance sheet. Now, what I like to do at this point is I like to add up the cash, add up the short-term investments, and add up the long-term investments, and you get a number. So let's say they got $1 in cash, $2 in short-term investments, and $3 in long-term investments. That's $6. You get a $6 total there. Now, obviously, if you're investing in public companies, it's going to be tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or billions in those numbers. But we're just doing simple math so you can understand the illustration, okay? Let's say, so between all those, they got $6 total there. Then what I like to look at is I like to look at short-term debt, and I like to look at long-term debt, okay? And I like to add up those numbers. Now, as far as, let's say they got $1 in short-term debt, and they also got $1 in long-term debt. So they got $2 total in the debts, the category there, okay? So basically you got the $6 in the first category, the $2 in the second category. I like to basically just see what the ratio is different between those two. It's a 3-to-1 ratio. So they got a 3-to-1 ratio better for cash and investments versus debts. Now, cash and cash equivalents is basically the company that has money that they can literally pull out in a second and just, do whatever they need to with that. Short-term investments, what that basically means is money that might be in a savings account or something, money that they can get very easily, but it's literally not in cash or a cash equivalent at that time. Maybe it's in a very short-term CD account or something like that, guys. Long-term investments is generally money the company has invested for the longer term. Maybe they have it in 1 year out CD accounts, something like that. Maybe they've bought stock into other companies. Those would all constitute as long-term investments. Short-term debt is debt that literally needs to be paid within the next 12 months. Long-term debt is debt that needs to be paid in more than a year from now, maybe several years from now. So, why am I looking at all those numbers? Well, if the company has a ton of debt, right, and they have very little cash and investments on that balance sheet, then as soon as that company becomes unprofitable or something, they're either going to have to take out more debt or they could potentially go out of business. A company that has a lot of cash, a lot of investments on a balance sheet, and little debt, then if hard troubles come, if a recession comes, they don't have to totally change the business model. They can still get through things because they can still pay their employees at the end of the day. They can still run operations at the end of the day. They don't need to go out of business. They don't need to take out a bunch more debt just to pay the employees to keep them around or some of those kinds of things. They don't need to do massive layoffs if they got plenty of cash around. So if you're investing in a company that has a ton of debt, has very little cash and investments around, just know that when things come bad, it's going to go really, really bad for your company, because they're either going to need to take out debt. Now, let's say they do get to take out debt. Let's say a bank does loan them money so they can take out even more debt, even though they're already debt loaded, right? Guess what that bank's going to do? They're not going to give them an easy interest rate. They're going to charge them a huge interest rate. Guess what? That interest rate is going to be really hard to pay back, and that's going to hurt the company even more long term, because they're going to charge, the bank's going to give them a loan. Yeah, we'll give you a loan at 10% interest rate, a 20% interest rate, a 30% interest rate, rather than in a good company can get an interest rate on a debt of maybe 3%, guys. That's a good company can do that. A company that's in financial troubles, the banks aren't going to run to them and give them money. Absolutely not. They will probably give them money, but they'll give them at a super high interest rate that will hurt that company forever, because they're going to be paying back this debt whenever the company does turn around. If it does turn around, they're going to be paying back this debt at insane interest rates, guys. So you really need to think about that at the end of the day. The balance sheet allows a company to be successful or not successful at the end of the day. That allows a company to make long-term decisions. A company has a weak balance sheet, it can just lay off employees like that, and it will hurt the company, and then, employees are everything in a lot of these businesses. I mean, that's one of the reasons Wynn Resorts has done so phenomenal is during the Great Recession, they didn't have to do employee layoffs. While a lot of casino resorts were laying off employees left and right, they didn't have to do it because they had the capital structure. They had the balance sheet that was good enough to allow them to keep employees, take losses, not make nearly the profits they thought they were going to do, and those kinds of things, because we were going through the Great Recession, and they got to come out of that a lot better. And guess what? It helped their brand, because they didn't have to, cut staff and all those kinds of things. So customers that were coming in those recession years, right? 2008, 2009, 2010 was also still a bad year. They still got phenomenal service. Other places were just, didn't have the employees there, and the customers got worse service. Wynn Resorts didn't do that, guys. So balance sheet allows a business to succeed or falter over the long term. So think about that when you're making an investment. Think about that when you're lining up and you're about to put that money in that stock. How's that balance sheet? If it's weak, it's going to come back to bother you. It's going to come back. You're not going to be able to sleep well at night. I sleep well at night every night, because guess what? Companies I invest in have very strong balance sheets. Now, there's a few different industries that, balance sheets can matter more. For instance, semiconductors. Semiconductors are basically companies that get put into, iPhones or iPads or any type of electronics, right? These type of companies, you really need to have an insanely strong balance sheet. Like, you need ratios of, 10 to 1 or better, in my opinion, for cash investments versus the debts. Why? Because guess what? One of those companies can be dropped out of a product, and their business can be adversely affected negatively so bad. So those ones need to have insanely strong balance sheets. Now, there's other companies that are more capital intensive that they don't need to have necessarily such a strong balance sheet as far as, cash investments versus debts. They just need to have better than their peers have in those situations. So something like, Wynn Resorts, we'll go back to that one. Those properties to build, they're extremely expensive, so they pretty much have to take out debt to build those properties. So those type of companies will always have more debts than they have investments. I'm just looking at it from a peer perspective in those situations. How are they versus their peers? Will they be able to do better than their peers because their capital structure is better than their peers' capital structure? Let's say you're an airline company or something like that. Like, those type of companies, they're generally just going to have more debts than they do cash and investment, just because guess what? In order to have an airline company, you need a lot of airplanes. Those airplanes are freaking expensive at the end of the day, guys. So a lot of those more capital intensive businesses, you want to look more to those as versus their peers. So if I'm looking at Southwest for an investment, I want to compare that to United Airlines. I want to compare that against, Delta and this airline and that airline, and see, does Southwest have a better balance sheet than their competitors have at that point? But there are certain industries you want to have a better balance sheet. Consumer electronics, things can change very fast in that industry. You want companies that have great balance sheets in that type of industry. Anything tech related, you always want those companies to have a very strong balance sheet. Don't mess with companies that have a weak balance sheet in those industries. Don't ever mess with any company that has a weak balance sheet. Just realize there's levels to it, and there's certain industries that need to have stronger balance balance sheets and others, especially semiconductors, which is a big part of investing nowadays. Semiconductors, you know, there's so many huge companies out there that are semiconductor plays. Don't mess with any of those unless they have an extremely strong balance sheet, because things can change so fast with those companies, guys. So I hope you enjoyed this segment. This was part 6 on the balance sheet. So vital, guys, so vital when you're doing modern long-term investing. I hope you really understand what the categories are you need to look at and all those kinds of things. The next part, part 7, we're going to look at the income statement. What do I judge in an income statement? How do I decipher a good income statement versus a bad income statement? All those kinds of things. I hope you really enjoy it.